Before you keep watching, drop this in the comments right now. I am the observer. I collapse the reality I choose. Don't think about it. Don't wait until the end. Just do it now, and I'll explain exactly why that matters before this video is over. At this exact moment, there is a version of you that already has everything you want. Not a version that's working toward it, not a version that's close, a version that already has it, already lives inside it, already woke up this morning inside the life you've been trying to build. And that version of you is not hypothetical. It is not motivational language. It is not a metaphor. It is a structural feature of how reality operates at its most fundamental level. And the reason you haven't accessed it yet has nothing to do with how hard you've been trying. It has everything to do with what your subconscious has been using as the lens through which it collapses the world around you into solid form. That sentence is going to make complete sense in the next few minutes. Stay with me. In 1927, in Brussels, Belgium, the most important gathering of scientific minds in human history took place. 29 physicists, 17 of them were Nobel Prize winners or would become Nobel Prize winners. Einstein was there, Bohr was there, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Pauli, Dirac, the entire architecture of modern physics in a single room. The meeting was called the Solvay Congress, and it was supposed to be about electrons. What it became was something that none of those men fully anticipated, the beginning of the most violent intellectual battle that science has ever produced. And at the center of that battle was an idea so disturbing, so structurally offensive to how human beings intuitively understand the world, that Einstein spent the last 30 years of his life trying to prove it wrong. He failed. The idea was this: a subatomic particle does not have a definite position until it is observed. Before observation, it exists in what physicists call superposition, a simultaneous spread across all possible positions, all possible states, coexisting at once. It is not in one place and we simply don't know which place. It is in all places, in a very real mathematical and physical sense, until the act of observation collapses that spread into a single, definite outcome. Niels Bohr was the one who drove this interpretation home with enough experimental evidence and theoretical rigor that it became the foundation of quantum mechanics as we know it today. Einstein hated it. His famous objection, "God does not play dice," was his way of insisting that there had to be hidden variables, that reality had to be definite, independent of observation. The experiments proved otherwise. Now here's where I need you to make a mental gear shift, because what I'm about to say is not a metaphor and it is not an analogy. I am applying this logic directly to the system that governs your life. Because the question that almost no one ever asks after learning about wave function collapse is this: if reality at its fundamental level only becomes fixed through the act of observation, then the identity of the observer matters. And if the identity of the observer matters, then whoever or whatever is doing the observing inside you is determining which version of reality collapses into your actual lived experience every single day. That observer is your subconscious. And right now, it has an identity installed, a dominant one. And that identity is not neutral. It is actively, continuously, silently collapsing your reality into a specific configuration, and it is doing so completely outside of your conscious awareness, completely independently of your goals, your wishes, your vision boards, your affirmations, and your intentions. This is not pessimism. This is neuroscience. And once you understand the mechanism precisely, you can do something about it. The physicist Amit Goswami spent decades at the University of Oregon arguing with rigorous theoretical grounding that consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain. It is not something the brain produces the way the liver produces bile. Consciousness, in Goswami's framework, is the field itself, the primordial medium in which physical reality takes shape.
The brain is the instrument through which a localized point of consciousness interacts with that field and collapses possibility into experience. This is not fringe thinking. Goswami's work is peer-reviewed, philosophically substantive, and structurally coherent with the mathematics of quantum mechanics in ways that materialism has struggled to match. The deeper implication of his position is that what you are, the quality of your consciousness, the dominant identity running in your subconscious, is not just an observer of reality, it is a co-creator of which reality gets selected from the field of all possible realities. And then there's Benjamin Libet. In the early 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet at the University of California ran a series of experiments that still make people uncomfortable when they fully absorb what was found. Libet asked participants to make a simple voluntary movement, flex a wrist, whenever they felt like it, and to note the exact position of a clock hand at the precise moment they became conscious of the intention to move. Meanwhile, EEG electrodes measured the electrical activity in the brain. What he found broke something in the standard story of human agency. The brain showed a preparatory electrical signal, what he called the readiness potential, 300 to 500 milliseconds before the participants consciously experienced the intention to move. The decision had already been made in the brain before the person knew they were deciding. The storm of philosophical debate this triggered has not calmed down in 40 years. What it means, at the level we're discussing, is structural and specific. The you that you experience as making choices, the voice in your head that deliberates, reasons, intends, and decides, is not the first mover. It is a late arrival. The actual initiation of action, the actual selection of trajectory, happens upstream. It happens at the level of subconscious processing, which is running on an identity that was built long before you had any say in its construction. You are not steering the car. You're a passenger who has been convinced they're steering because they can see the road. Now here is why this matters so much more than it's usually presented. Most personal development frameworks treat the subconscious like it's a stubborn employee you need to convince. You send it affirmations, you repeat things, you try to override it with willpower. But the subconscious doesn't respond to persuasion. It responds to identity. It responds to what it has been conditioned to recognize as the dominant emotional truth of who you are. Not what you say you are, not what you want to be. What you have been emotionally, repeatedly, in the states you visit most often, in the automatic reactions you have when life applies pressure. That is the identity the subconscious uses when it goes to collapse the field. That is the lens through which your observer self selects which reality gets fixed into form. Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist at USC, whose work on emotion and decision-making fundamentally changed how we understand the brain, introduced a concept he called somatic markers. Somatic markers are emotional shortcuts, rapid-fire physiological signals that the brain has learned to associate with certain outcomes, certain contexts, certain identities.
When you face a decision, your brain does not run a complete cost-benefit analysis from scratch. It checks the somatic marker library first. It fires the emotional shortcut that matches the dominant identity pattern. And if the dominant pattern, the most repeated, most viscerally embedded emotional state, is scarcity, then the marker fires scarcity. If the dominant pattern is lack, the marker fires lack. If the dominant pattern is fear, the marker fires fear, and the subconscious collapses accordingly. Not because you're broken, because you're working exactly as designed. The design just hasn't been updated to match who you're trying to become. This is the core of what I call the collapse state. It is not a visualization exercise. It is not a mindset hack. It is a neurological reprogramming protocol grounded in the specific conditions under which the subconscious is most permeable to identity revision. And those conditions are not random. They are measurable, they are reproducible, and they are available to you right now. Here is what happens neurologically at the moment of identity collapse and why the specific sequence I'm about to give you is not arbitrary. The brain operates in multiple frequency bands. Beta, roughly 14 to 30 Hz, is the waking, analytical state. This is where your critical faculty lives. This is the gatekeeper that compares every incoming impression against your existing identity and rejects anything that doesn't match. When you try to affirm abundance while your critical faculty is fully online, it doesn't accept the impression. It cross-references it against the emotional truth file and returns an error. Theta, between 4 and 8 Hz, is different. Theta is the frequency of hypnagogic states, of deep meditation, of that twilight space between waking and sleep. In Theta, the critical faculty drops, the subconscious becomes directly accessible, the gatekeeper goes offline. And research from multiple neurofeedback labs has shown that experienced meditators moving into Theta show significantly reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, exactly the region responsible for analytical filtering and identity defense. What this means is that the window for genuine collapse, for actually updating the dominant identity the subconscious uses when it collapses your field, is not available in your ordinary waking state. It requires you to descend into Theta deliberately. And once you're there, the rules of what gets installed change completely. The deliberate collapse protocol moves in 4 precise steps, and the sequence is non-negotiable. Each step creates the condition for the next one to work. Skip a step, reorder them, rush through them, and you get surface-level relaxation at best. Follow them exactly, repeatedly, consistently, and you begin to do what Libet's experiments suggest is actually possible, intervening upstream. Not overriding the subconscious, reprogramming what identity it runs when it goes to collapse. Step 1 is descent. You need to get into Theta, and the most reliable non-pharmaceutical method for doing this is a specific breathing pattern that has been validated by multiple heart rate variability studies and neurofeedback research. Exhalation twice as long as inhalation. If you inhale for 4 counts, you exhale for 8. Slow, deliberate, unbroken. Body completely still, eyes closed, jaw unclenched. This pattern activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest branch, which in turn signals the brain to decelerate its frequency. 20 minutes of this uninterrupted in a position where you won't fall asleep will bring most people into the threshold of Theta. The key marker is a slight heaviness in the limbs, a soft visual field even with closed eyes, and a loosening of the tight grip on linear thought. If thoughts are still arriving in crisp sentences, you haven't descended enough. You want the impressionistic associative state, the half-dream quality. That's the window. Step 2 is the installation, and this is where almost every visualization practice in mainstream self-help gets it catastrophically wrong. The instruction you've almost certainly received is to visualize what you want, to picture the future, to imagine yourself achieving the goal. And this approach has a structural flaw that makes it almost guaranteed to reinforce the exact identity you're trying to replace. Because I want this, and I am working toward this, and I am trying to have this, all contain the same subconscious message: this is not mine yet. The wanting is the signal of absence, and the subconscious, which is now in its most impressionable state, encodes the absence. The correction is specific. You do not visualize a process. You do not visualize an outcome in the future. You visualize a single, compressed, ultra-specific moment that is already in the past tense, a moment that has already happened. Not, I will be standing at the top of the mountain. A moment after you've already stood there,
the specific quality of your breath in the car on the way home, the way the seat feels, the color of the light through the window, what your hands are doing, the particular kind of tired that lives in your legs, the small, ordinary detail of a life that has already integrated the thing you wanted. The brain in Theta doesn't receive this as fiction, it receives this as memory. And memory is how the subconscious knows who you are. This is not a performance of positivity, it is a deliberate reconstruction of your experiential history at the level where your identity actually lives. Step 3 is anchoring through sensory specificity, and this step exists because of what we know about how the hippocampus consolidates memory. The hippocampus, the brain's primary memory formation structure, encodes experiences more durably when they carry multisensory data.
Visual alone is weak. Visual plus tactile plus olfactory plus auditory creates a thick, layered memory trace that is much harder to overwrite and much more likely to be recognized as foundational by the subconscious when it searches for the dominant identity during collapse. Daniel Schachter at Harvard has done extensive research on what he calls the constructive nature of memory, demonstrating that the brain does not store memories like files on a hard drive. It reconstructs them, and crucially, it cannot reliably distinguish between a vividly constructed impression in a highly receptive state and an actual lived experience. The neural signature is the same. In Theta, with a fully populated sensory impression, you are not pretending. You are building a memory that your brain will use as evidence of who you are. So in Step 3, inside the moment you've created, you reach for the sensory details. What does something feel like in your hands? Is there a smell in the air? What is the ambient sound in that scene? What is the texture of a surface you're touching? What is the temperature? You are not decorating the visualization, you are densifying it. You are giving the hippocampus the raw material it needs to build a memory that survives the return to beta state consciousness and lodges itself in the identity file the subconscious consults every time it goes to collapse your field. Step 4 is the hardest one, and it is the one that will most clearly reveal whether you have actually done this work or whether you have performed it while keeping your old identity safely intact in a backup file. Step 4 is exit without verification. You complete the descent, the installation, and the anchoring, and then you open your eyes, drink some water, and do something ordinary. You do not check to see if you feel different. You do not monitor your results over the next 24 hours for signs that it's working. You do not tell anyone what you did. You do not revisit the session mentally to see if it was good enough, because the moment you check, you are operating from the old identity. The old identity is the one that doesn't trust, the one that monitors, the one that needs evidence before it will believe. Checking is the subconscious saying, I don't actually believe this collapsed. And if you engage with that signal, if you let the checking happen and then argue with it, or reassure yourself, or repeat the protocol to make sure, you are handing the microphone back to exactly the identity you were trying to replace. The protocol ended at the close of Step 3. What comes after is not your job. Your job was the collapse. What the field does with a collapsed wave function is not something the observer manages. The observer observes. The collapse happens. The rest unfolds according to the new dominant identity. Now let me tell you the thing that almost every discussion of this material leaves out, because leaving it out is what turns a genuinely powerful neurological practice into another self-help ritual that people do for 2 weeks and then abandon when they don't see Instagram-ready results in their physical reality. The collapse state is not a one-time event. It is a practice of repetition until the new identity has more accumulated emotional weight than the old one. This is not a spiritual idea. It is what Hebb's law describes in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together wire together. The identity that your subconscious uses as its default collapse lens is the one with the most deeply grooved neural pathway, the one that has been activated the most consistently over the longest period of time. You are not trying to have one profound experience that permanently rewires you. You are building a new pathway through repetition until it becomes the path of least resistance, until the new identity is structurally dominant, until the somatic marker for completeness fires faster than the somatic marker for lack, until the subconscious goes to collapse the field and the first thing it reaches for is the identity of someone who already has. Most people never reach this point, not because they didn't try, but because they mixed in doubt too consistently and too quickly. They did the protocol well, they felt something, and then they went back into their ordinary beta state lives and spent 14 hours running the old emotional pattern in the background noise of low-level anxiety, of monitoring, of the constant low hum of scarcity identity. And they wondered why 6 sessions of good Theta work hadn't overridden it. The ratio wasn't right. You were competing with years of deeply grooved neural infrastructure. The protocol doesn't need to be longer, it needs to be consistent, it needs to be protected from interruption, and it needs to be followed, every time, by a deliberate refusal to let the old identity claw back control through the mechanism of checking. There is a version of you that already has what you want. The quantum mechanical description of reality is not a metaphor for this, it is the literal structural context in which this is true. Multiple outcomes coexist until collapse. Your subconscious is the collapsing mechanism. The identity it operates from is the lens. You can change the lens, not through willpower, not through positive thinking, through deliberate, neurologically grounded intervention at the exact frequency and in the exact sequence that allows the subconscious to receive a new identity impression as real, as experiential, as foundational to the record of who you are. The 4 steps are not suggestions. Descent into Theta. Installation of a completed past tense moment with full sensory density.
Anchoring through multisensory specificity. Exit without verification. That's the protocol. That's the mechanism. That's the collapse. And I want you to go back to that comment you left at the beginning of this video, or the one you're about to leave right now if you haven't yet. I am the observer. I collapse the reality I choose. That sentence is not affirmation language. It is a precise description of what you actually are and what you actually do. You are not a passive recipient of circumstances. You are a point of consciousness in a field of infinite superposition, and the identity you carry into every moment of observation is the mechanism through which one reality becomes solid and all others remain potential. You have been collapsing all along. The only question that has ever mattered is, with which identity? Now you know how to answer that question with precision. Now you know where the lever is. Now you know why the lever works. The rest is practice. The rest is repetition. The rest is the daily decision to descend, to install, to anchor, and to walk away, trusting that the observer has done its work and that the field responds to collapse the way it always has, the way it always will, with perfect, indifferent, mechanical fidelity to whatever identity stepped into the moment of observation. You are the observer. Collapse accordingly.